In the shadow of Mount Sinai, under the harsh desert sun, a man named Moses stood before a burning bush that was not consumed by the flames. It was not just any fire. It was a divine call, a moment that would change the course of history. The voice that emerged from the flames declared, "I am the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." This was no ordinary introduction. It was a declaration of divine authority, a claim that would set the stage for one of the most dramatic and pivotal events in human history: the Exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. The story of the Exodus is not just a tale of liberation. It is a story of divine intervention, of a God who is both merciful and terrifying. The God of the burning bush is not a passive observer, but an active participant in the affairs of humanity. He is a God who speaks, who acts, and who demands obedience. The phrase, "Aye, Asher, Aye, I am who I am," is more than a mere introduction. It is a declaration of sovereignty. It is a statement that this God is beyond human comprehension, yet intimately involved in the lives of those he has chosen. Moses, a man who had fled Egypt years ago to escape the consequences of his rash actions, was now being called back to confront the very power that had once threatened his life. The task was monumental, and Moses knew it. He was a man of humble beginnings, a shepherd by trade, and he lacked the eloquence and authority to lead a people out of bondage. But God had a plan, and he was not about to let Moses' doubts stand in the way. The first step was to convince the Israelites themselves. Moses, armed with the power to perform wonders, returned to Egypt and gathered the elders of Israel. He spoke the words that God had given him, promising deliverance from the cruelty of their Egyptian masters. The promise was not just of freedom, but of a land flowing with milk and honey, a place where they could live in peace and prosperity. The elders listened and they believed. But the journey was far from over. Moses and his brother Aaron approached Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, with the request that the Israelites be allowed to go into the wilderness to worship their God. Pharaoh, a man who saw himself as a god, was not easily swayed. He refused, and the stage was set for a series of divine interventions that would leave no doubt about the power of the Lord. The first of these interventions was the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. This was not a simple act of stubbornness. It was a divine manipulation that ensured the Israelites' suffering would continue, but ultimately lead to a greater demonstration of God's might. The 10 plagues that followed were a series of supernatural events that brought Egypt to its knees. Each plague was more severe than the last, and each was a direct challenge to the gods of Egypt. The waters of the Nile turned to blood. The land was overrun by frogs, lice, and flies, and the livestock died. The plague of boils brought suffering to the Egyptians, and the hail and locusts destroyed their crops. The darkness that descended upon the land was so thick that it could be felt, and it lasted for 3 days. But the final plague, the death of the firstborn, was the most devastating of all. In the middle of the night, the Lord passed through the land of Egypt, and every firstborn, from the son of Pharaoh to the son of the lowliest slave, was struck down. The only exception was the Israelites, who had been instructed to mark their doorposts with the blood of a lamb. The sight of the blood was the sign that the Lord would pass over their homes, sparing their firstborn. The devastation was complete, and Pharaoh, finally broken, relented. The Israelites were free to leave. But the journey out of Egypt was not without its challenges. The Lord had promised to lead them to a new land, but the path was not easy. The Israelites faced the harsh conditions of the desert, and their faith was tested. They grumbled and complained, and their leadership was often in question. Moses, the man who had led them out of Egypt, was not always the most confident or eloquent of leaders. But the Lord was with them, guiding them through the wilderness and providing for their needs. The crossing of the Red Sea is perhaps the most iconic moment of the Exodus. As the Egyptian army pursued them, the Lord parted the waters, allowing the Israelites to pass through on dry land. When the Egyptians followed, the waters closed over them, and the Israelites were finally free. The event was a powerful demonstration of the Lord's power and protection, and it left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the Israelites. The journey continued, and the Israelites eventually arrived at Mount Sinai, where the Lord would reveal his law to Moses. The 10 Commandments, along with the many other laws and regulations, were given to guide the Israelites in their new life of freedom. The covenant that was formed at Mount Sinai was a binding agreement between the Lord and his people, a promise that if they followed his commandments, he would be their God and they would be his people. The story of the Exodus is a powerful narrative of divine intervention and human liberation. It is a story of a God who is both merciful and just, who is willing to intervene in the affairs of humanity to bring about his purposes. The Exodus is not just a historical event. It is a theological statement about the nature of God and his relationship with his people. It is a story that has inspired countless generations and continues to resonate in the hearts of those who seek freedom and justice. In the end, the Exodus is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is a God who is willing to act on behalf of his people. It is a story of hope, of a God who is faithful and true, and who will not abandon those who call on his name. The burning bush, the plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, and the covenant at Mount Sinai are all part of a larger narrative of divine redemption. The Exodus is a story that continues to speak to us today, reminding us that in the face of oppression and injustice, there is a God who hears our cries and comes to our aid. The journey of the Israelites from slavery to freedom is a journey that each of us must undertake in our own lives. It is a journey of faith, of trust in a God who is both powerful and merciful. The Exodus is a call to action, a reminder that we are not alone in our struggles, and that the God who delivered the Israelites from Egypt is the same God who can deliver us today. The story of the Exodus is a story of hope, and it is a story that will continue to inspire generations to come.